Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. I'm going to read some boilerplate language to describe the organization that today's guest leads. It's a well-written and important summary, and it reads, quote, Indiana Black Expo celebrates cultural diversity and inclusiveness across all races, ethnicities, nationalities, generations, socioeconomic levels, and religious affiliations. IBE's mission is to be an effective voice and vehicle for the social and economic advancement of African Americans. Though known for two major cultural events, Summer Celebration and Circle City Classic, IBE provides year-round program initiatives focused on the needs of the African American community. End quote. In my words, the work of this organization is obviously critical, and we're so pleased to be joined today by its leader, person who's been in charge of Indiana Black Expo since 2008, Tanya Mckinzie, President and CEO. Welcome to the In Chamber.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Tanya, the work of Indiana Black Expo is obviously, as we've mentioned, important at all times, but I'm sure that reached an even higher level in this past 14 months or so during the pandemic. Can you talk about a few of the important partnerships, programs that were developed over that time frame?
Absolutely. Just like any other small minority business, we were impacted, obviously, because we had to cancel our fundraisers, which bring in about $2 million of revenue to the organization. But the positive sort of thing about it was with the cancellation of those fundraisers, it allowed us to really focus on those initiatives that we do already year round, but we were able to expand in areas and able to really focus and make sure that we focused on those initiatives that had the highest impact for the community during that time. And so for 14 years, we've been providing professional development training to educators and administrators in K through 12, as well as higher ed. And that is critical because we want to make sure that they're implementing best practices as it relates to culture, code of conduct, classroom management, alternative, strategies to discipline and a lot of those things that we've been focused on for 14 years. Obviously, mental health, social and emotional learning, a lot of those things are very important. Technology during the pandemic. And so, we have had been blessed by the partnerships that had already been in place with the Indiana Department of Education, the Indiana Commission for Higher Ed, Indiana University, Indiana Department of Child Services, and the list kind of goes on. I mean, the great thing about that is we had, pre-pandemic about, we would see about 800, anywhere between 800 to 1,000 educators and administrators attend. The virtual delivery sort of platform allowed us to get over 5,500 educators and administrators to participate in the conference or to attend the conference. And that was great. We had 11 people that were out of the country. About 23% of those attendees were out of state, and then 77% in state.
So you're able to do more of the already good things that were taking place.
Absolutely. And so we continued on with our job fairs. We continued on. We were blessed to have a new partnership last year with the Indiana Economic Development IEDC, as well as the Small Business Development entity. And we were able to work with small businesses during that time to make sure, number one, that they knew about the Governor's Fund, they knew about SBA opportunities with respect to grants and loans and those type of things, to make sure they stayed afloat, but also to make sure that they had the technical support and the assistance to make sure operationally that they survived during the economy. So we got an opportunity to work with about 1,800 businesses, small minority businesses across the state, as part of that new partnership last year.
I know you mentioned some of the state agencies and things, but I think it's also important to point out for the listeners, just like the Indiana Chamber, Indiana Black Expo is a statewide organization. I know you did work in areas around the state and have done so for a number of years. Have those programs even taken on a higher level in recent years?
Absolutely. And with respect to that partnership with IEDC, the 12 chapters that we have that's across the state of Indiana, obviously participated in that with their local chambers and the other partners that they had in their communities. They also, provided those services based on the needs of their own localities as well.
And I'm looking at some of the materials on your website. Again, just critical grants for small businesses. I know in the Fort Wayne area and Northwest Indiana, some of those things that were just, I'm sure, essential for some businesses to be able to keep their doors open.
Absolutely. And, we're blessed because we brought on some new partnerships. Flagstar Bank was one of those last year that reached out to us. We didn't reach out to them. They reached out to us and said, hey, we see that businesses are struggling, particularly small minority businesses, and we want your help to disseminate some grants that they had. And so it was a great opportunity. I think we had like a week and a half to put that program together and get that money out there. But it was a blessing to be able to have that type of partnership and to work with someone that realizes that a lot of our businesses were hurting at that time.
Yeah. Tanya, when I read the description of the organization, I focused on, certainly mentioned the social, but and the economic advancement of people. And I want to focus on that a little bit even more. I mean, they're truly linked, aren't they, between the social and economic advancement? You can't have one without the other.
Absolutely linked. The economics, obviously, economics impacts social mobility. We know that at all levels. Another big sort of implicit part of that is the just systemic sort of things that we tend to focus on to make sure that those barriers, we're continuing to confront some of those barriers that actually exist, as well as policies that have a huge impact on really the African-American community and those who are vulnerable and voiceless. And so economics is a big sort of piece of that as an engine that impacts social mobility. But there are a lot of other factors, discrimination, racism, a lot of the other factors that also impact social mobility as well.
Tanya, you wrote a column last year in the Indianapolis Business Journal where you talked about it creating more economic opportunity for Blacks. What do you see happening now in that area? And are there some key next steps to kind of move us from the talking about it stage to some true good action steps?
I mean, I think, right now there has been a lot of corporations and a lot of folks who have stepped up and have made a lot of commitment and pledges from a social justice standpoint, with economics, obviously, being one of those pillars that they're looking at, not only looking at it internally with respect to their operations, but also with respect to working with businesses from a procurement standpoint, as well as supporting organizations that may be out there that are impacting the community, like an Indiana Black Expo and other folks. I think the jury is still out, to be very transparent with respect to the outcomes of this. But I'm at several tables with a lot of corporations who have already been partners of Indiana Black Expo, and I sense a genuine interest and really wanting to level the playing field as it relates to African Americans, as it relates to businesses, and then even looking at their workforces. And so that's something that we're focused on, with just making sure that the follow-up is there, so that we can see what the outcomes will be from those pledges that have been made.
Tanya, how does 2021 feel different than past years, whether go back to your tenure at Black Expo since 2008 or any time in the interim? You said the jury's still out, and that's absolutely the case, but what is it that maybe gives you more optimism that we're on the right path at this time?
The commitment. Like I said, I believe that there had been some corporations, there had been some entities, some individuals, that had already supported. But I do believe what happened with respect to the murder of George Floyd elevated the sort of awareness of some of the issues. I wouldn't necessarily say the need, but the awareness of some of the racism, some of the things that still exist that impacts our community. So I think that's what has made things different. I think there's more of an awareness, a recognition that, okay, this is more blatant. And there's been some blatant examples. And so I think that has led to a lot of commitments. It's led to a lot of coalitions, a lot of collective sort of strategies to work together with a lot of entities out there and organizations that are working together to address equity, and whether or not that's in economics, health, across the board. And what I like and what I've seen is a lot of strategy, right? Not just going out and just writing a check or to make folks feel good, but just, okay, strategically, how do we impact the quality of life, not only for African Americans, but for minorities, for everyone, just to make sure that we live in a world that is inclusive and there is this sense of belonging that individuals have in Indiana, that they want to be here. They want to work at these corporations. They want to feel like they belong. And so I do think that there are some genuine efforts right now and more strategic efforts to try to address some of the issues and the barriers systemically that exist.
Do you find more people listening? I think in the past, I guess I would phrase it, maybe, again, it was writing a check or doing something that seemed to be the right thing to do. But I guess, are people coming across maybe as more vulnerable, they're not understanding the challenges and really listening and trying to get at the deeper understanding?
What I've seen, and again, I can only speak to, I won't say only speak to, but I can speak more closely to this legislative session that just occurred. And I'm part of a coalition right now that was created after the murder of George Floyd with a lot of businesses and advocacy groups. And the first time historically that I've ever seen anything like this, where we've come together and work on policy issues. I think that there has been a lot of listening from the corporate community. What I would like to see is, and this is something that on all sides we have to work on, is relationship building from with our elected and appointed officials and with the African American community. There is a perception and oftentimes a reality that a lot of the elected, these bills are proposed, but no one's had conversations prior to even proposing these bills. And so I think that is an issue on both sides, where we all have to do a better job with building relationships so that we understand the different perspectives of each other. And again, we may not agree on everything, but at least we know, and at least we are doing a better job to understand and to build relationships. So that's what I would like to see across the board. But I have seen amongst the corporate community a better understanding, listening. And then not only listening, but apologizing and just saying, we understand what you're going through and we just want you to know, we understand it. And so that has been, I think, extremely helpful.
Well, on that legislative front, and let's get into that a little bit, I think we had a great example in this session of the police reform bill that passed, in which those discussions took place starting last summer. And a lot of work went into it before it ever came to the State House in January. So I think hopefully maybe sets a little bit of a precedent of ongoing discussions and that legislation passed with unanimously, I believe, throughout both the House and the Senate.
Absolutely. And I think that was a great example of bipartisan efforts. And there was a lot of work done a while ago, kind of leading up to that on both sides of the aisles there. And kudos to everyone that was involved in that. As it relates to some of the other forms of policy, we just need to utilize that as an example and replicate that in other areas where there were other sort of anti-protest bills, a lot of other things dealing with the criminal code and criminal law and some of the other things. And what we wish we would have seen was more root cause sort of proposed bills when we're sitting here talking about economics right now, but we all know that there's a lot of root issues and root causes to poverty and some of the things that exist in our community. And so I felt like we were really playing like defense because there was just a lot of policy that was proposed that I would say, our organization didn't necessarily agree with. And I just wish that there could have been more conversation amongst some of the root causes type of legislation. And we'll get there. Again, like I said, it takes relationship building, and we realize that we need to do a better job across all spectrums with building those relationships.
A couple more economic questions, or at least thoughts. You mentioned a little bit earlier about maybe minority contractors when it comes to spending goals or diversity and hiring goals that companies might have. And I think you wrote about this a little bit too in one of your pieces. Good, but maybe they're a little bit of a double-edged sword with those. Do those goals sometimes place certain limitations on actions that can take place?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, we want to make sure, that corporations, governmental entities, those who really say that they're focused on procurement and they're focused on supplier diversity, we want to make sure that they have goals, period, right? And that they are meeting their goals. And there are a lot of folks who aren't right now. So that's an issue within itself because of the goals that are being set and not meeting those goals. However, when you talk about that two-edged sword, there are some very qualified and quality minority-owned businesses that tend, in my view, to be placed in a bucket as it relates to serving as subs, and could actually be primes, and could actually has the capacity to receive more opportunity and more work. And so now, because you have these goals and these numbers, they tend to get pigeonholed.
Well, let's just not meet the numbers. Let's look beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the conversation right now is around startups, and I think that obviously we have to look at startups overall, right, in Indiana, and as it relates to minority-owned startups, looking at that as really a strategy. But we also have to look at the existing companies that are already there, and how do we sort of, get them to thrive from that perspective, and making sure that we have the proper ecosystem in place for them to advance and the opportunities. And so you got to look at both from that perspective.
Yeah. Tanya, some of the social factors we mentioned, high incarceration rates or certain increased usage of certain government services for the African American community. But again, doesn't that all go back to what we've just been talking about? The economic opportunity is the key to reducing those statistics.
I mean, I think it goes back to so. To answer your question, yes, but I think it's a deeper sort of, there should be a deeper response to that. And that is, there has been historical racism that we've dealt with in our community that takes us back to slavery, takes us back to Jim Crow. And there have been consequences of that. And so, unfortunately, for the African American community and other minority groups, we don't have generational wealth because we were disadvantaged. We didn't have those opportunities. And so we talk about leveling the playing field. And so, yes, we're incarcerated because there's still, again, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. Economics is a very large factor, but there are also, there's racism still exists. And I don't want to talk about economics only, because that is also another issue that we have to deal with, and whether or not there's implicit bias, intentionality, or just systemic, right? With systems that really need to be fixed because of the consequences, whether or not they're intentional or unintentional. And so absolutely, the answer to that is yes, but it's a little more in depth because there's a variety of factors that impact that.
And not that we're gonna solve this century-long problem today, but you can't legislate racism, the end of racism. You can't regulate it, I would offer. But again, are you confident we're seeing more people that understand this systemic racism, and individuals and businesses that seem to be willing to do something about it, not to be more active?
I see it on the corporation side right now. Yes, I see it. And the question is, will I continue to see it 3, 4, 5 years from now? Will there be a consistent sort of intentionality as it relates to that? And again, 5 years from now, I hope so. From elected and appointed officials, I would like to see a little more with respect to just training to make sure there's no implicit biases. I mean, when we sort of look at policy, right, that's a huge sort of impact and one of the things that we have to look at. And so for those who are creating it, we want to make sure that they're also trained. They're also making sure that those implicit biases don't exist. And again, that goes back to what I talked about earlier with respect to relationship building, but also making sure that they are being trained to make sure that they are keenly aware of those issues that are out there.
So the $64,000 question then is, how do we go from today and hearing more and seeing more good signs to having that continue 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now? What are some of the key next steps? How is that momentum, if there is some, how's that maintained and grown?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I know that the Indianapolis Chamber, and again, I know we have to look at this statewide and not just locally with respect to Indianapolis, but I know that there are some coalitions. I'm part of another coalition with the business community we're extending our reach statewide on more of the policy issues, which is very key. So that work is being put in place as it relates to next steps with respect to collecting data, right? And making sure that our decisions are data informed. And also just making sure that we know where to focus and where those priorities are. And I think that there's a lot of leaders right now that are working on this at the table. And it's something that I have not seen historically in the past. So I feel very good about it. It's up to us as leaders to make sure that we continue to do that and that we're continuing to build relationships across the board in order for that work to get done.
Well, Tanya, I'm going to throw in here a little bit of your background. Just your undergraduate studies at Indiana State University, been a member of the board of trustees there for quite a long time, earned your law degree from the IU School of Law, so touching many aspects of Indiana. I'm going to move away from the economic and even some of the policy things and some of the things that are part of your work. But if I can ask, and it's a difficult subject, but ask about your emotional reactions to what we saw last summer, whether it's the George Floyd killing or any number of acts of violence. And again, on a national basis, or what we see in Indiana here with so many senseless killings that take place. How does that affect you personally, emotionally?
So, and again, it's difficult for me to group them all together, but if I go back to George Floyd and separate that from the violence in Indianapolis, disappointment, hurt, pain, confusion, because I don't understand, I don't know if it's a matter of, I don't understand it. I don't want to accept racism from that perspective. It's hard for me. I mean, it's that hurt that's there, right? Trying to understand that situation. But I think even more importantly for me as a mom of a 17-year-old, when I have a 17-year-old who tells me that she does not want to learn how to drive because she's scared she's going to be pulled over by the police, is a reality that many folks in my community we have to deal with. She has no desire. And just think about that. When we were 16, 17, we wanted to jump in a car and was ready to go, right?
Yeah, we'd do whatever we could to get behind the wheel of the car. Yeah,
absolutely. Having to process that and having to explain to my children so that they can understand it when I don't fully understand it. It's hard. And I'm still processing it even as of today, as it relates to the violence in, our community and what we've seen over the years. And, I was impacted by it over a week and a half ago. My nephew was killed was murdered here in Indianapolis
So,
from gun violence.
yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that.
And so for me, that's always been over the last 3-4 years, more of a hopeless issue because I know that there are so many factors that impact that. And some factors that I have no control over. And all we can continue to do is make sure everyone is held accountable, make sure that we're doing our part, but also wanting to understand the overall strategy for crime prevention, right? So that we understand where we fit in and where we can play a more impactful role. And so that's the conversations that I've been having over the last few days is what does that look like? And holding everyone accountable. So, that's really the stance that I have on those issues, but there are deep issues for our community. And from a economic community standpoint, I am from the school of thought that we can do everything in the world to try to build our communities from a community development and economic development standpoint. But if we do not drive out crime, it impacts that. And so that should be a priority. And we'll continue to, see what we can do and to just make sure we're holding everyone accountable to address it.
Tanya, I don't want to wrap up without talking about Summer Celebration, one of those signature events that Indiana Black Expo is known for each year. Of course, as you mentioned, had to be adjusted. Many events canceled in 2020, but as we're early June here with the release of this conversation, what's coming up for 2021? What do you anticipate taking place with Summer Celebration?
So, we obviously, it's a modified Summer Celebration this year. And, we started planning this months and months ago and had to go off of what the requirements from a COVID standpoint, what those requirements were at that time. And so we just made a decision at that time that we were going to stay away from most indoor events. And with the ones that we would do physically, we would make sure that it was invitation only and we limited the number and all of that. And so our outdoor events will still take place, but we're very excited because, we just purchased the former Crossroads Bible College building less than 2 years ago, where we have 45,000 square feet. It's been under renovation ever since we've been here. But the business conference will take place with the governor's reception and the mayor's breakfast on July 12th in our building. And we're very excited about that. Can't wait for the governor, everybody to see what we have going on here. And we'll continue to work with those businesses through that business conference this year. Our employment opportunity fairs, we sort of have been doing those year round and not necessarily as part of Summer Celebration alone, but we also will have our education conference, which is big and is key right now, particularly during a pandemic. Just making sure our educators are equipped and that we are continuing to provide best practices on making sure we're decreasing that opportunity gap for children of color. And so that will take place. We anticipate that we will have over 7,000 educators and administrators for that. So we have a lot going on. We're very excited about what we have going on. And, we look forward to that celebration with our community this year in a different format.
Sure.
But because we're going to make sure that we are making sure everyone's going to be safe. And we're following all rules and regulations, but we're excited that, the state is opening up and, we can fellowship and network and be around folks. And we're looking forward to that because we miss it.
Oh, absolutely. Tanya, can you talk a little bit about some of the influences in your work, in your career, briefly, maybe again, some of the people or activities that kind of impact you and drive you in your work?
Yeah, I think and I appreciate, Tom, you saying, hey, we're known for Summer Celebration and Classic, these fundraisers, but what really drives me is working with the youth and families and having a performing arts academy in this building where we have youth in here, where we're not only helping them develop their talents, right, innovatively, but also wrapping around academic supports to make sure that they are doing what they need to do, whether or not it's traditionally in school or if it's working and, following another pathway. And so that is what gives me meaning because, I come from a single parent family, background, modest means, and to be able to work with the children in our building is the one thing that keeps me going.
Well, yeah, you may have answered my last question, and I hurt myself there by my order of questions, but I wrap up with, and you can say, I just told you so, but what makes a great day for Tanya Mckinzie at the end of the day, whether it's personally, professionally, well, what has made it a wonderful day for you?
So I can add to that. I mean, the children, obviously, the mission type of work that we do is what makes it a great day. Also, what I enjoy, and this may just be based on my background with being in corporate America and, working at Ice Miller and the law firms before I came over here, is we work with a lot of corporate partners too. And so we have an opportunity to really sit and work alongside them to help them meet their business objectives. So what's fascinating for me is, yes, we have this community impact work, but we're also working with, our partners on helping them meet their objectives. And that is a great balance for me in this work, because I get to see sort of both sides, the charitable type of focus, but also that business sort of focus with having that business acumen to work alongside our corporate partners.
Yeah. Well, Tanya Mckinzie, thanks so much for joining us today, sharing your thoughts on these many important topics. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom, for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. We're sure you've enjoyed our conversation with Tanya Mckinzie, President and CEO of Indiana Black Expo. Before we leave today, a couple of important chamber events in June. And just as Tanya mentioned, adapting and adjusting to kind of the protocols in place. A couple of hybrid events, both in-person and virtual options available. The 57th Annual Indiana HR Conference, June 7th through 9th. Just a large number of programs and education sessions, including a track on diversity and inclusion as part of that HR conference. And then second, June 23rd, 24th is the 2021 Cybersecurity Conference. So another critical business issue that impacts so many. An outstanding lineup of both state and national speakers for that event. You can learn much more about both of those at indianachamber.com. As mentioned last time, we've got a couple other great conversations coming up here in June. We take advantage of 3 episodes this month. We're going to be talking with both retiring Indiana University President Michael McRobbie as he wraps up his tenure at Indiana this month, and also Scott McCorkle of MetaCX and former head of Salesforce and one of our leading entrepreneurs in Indiana. So we look forward to those. As always, thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next episode.